we have a contract, it's like, it can have into more of a verbal, depending on it.
All right, welcome everybody. I hope the people in the live stream can hear us. Thank you very much, Dominique, for organizing. Thank you very much, OKLink, for hosting. Wonderful venue. Plenty of you showed up. People live are not going to see it. I'm very quickly going to go through the rules. We have two teams today arguing for two different sides, two opposing sides, two mutually exclusive sides. We have the Bitcoin Cash team in the affirmative, bringing a case to why Bitcoin Cash would be better, a needed upgrade, why people should move to Bitcoin Cash or buy Bitcoin Cash. Talking for the Bitcoin Cash team is Jake Smith and Jaxi Liu. They have each 7 minutes to present their side. On the other side, we have the Bitcoin team, Felix Weis and Simon Dixon also have 7 minutes each. Relatively simple forth and back, 7 minutes for the first speaker of the Bitcoin Cash side, 7 minutes for the first speaker of the Bitcoin side to reply and bring arguments, and back to the Bitcoin Cash sides to reply and reinstate their case for their side. Finishing will be the second speaker for the Bitcoin side, after which we will conclude the debate and move over into like a Q&A type discussion where you as the audience can also bring yourself in. If you're watching online, you can tweet at us, maybe add some comments, and then we might also add your questions or address the audience. Is everybody here? I believe I see everybody except for Simon. There he is. Perfect. Yeah, please. Often rules of parliamentary debate, the Bitcoin side will take the right side, and the affirmative side will take the left side. So I will be taking time, 7 minutes for each speech. After 6 minutes, I will clap once. After 7 minutes, I will clap twice. And if you're still speaking after 7 minutes 15, I will slowly clap you off stage until you vacate the speaking air. Who's going first?
Wait, some rules. No shouting.
Yes.
No
yeah. Please be respectful. It's called Bitcoin Cash, not
and
Cash.
no Bcash.
Who's speaking first for the Bitcoin Cash side? I will. Jake, I very much welcome you as the first speaker of the House, and I welcome you to open the case for the affirmative.
Thank you, Leo. My name is Jake Smith. I work for Bitcoin.com and big supporter of Bitcoin Cash. I'm not super used to formal debate style, so I'm not sure I can talk for 7 minutes straight, but I'll give it a go. So how many of you are familiar with the history of Bitcoin Cash and the community split? Okay, about half of you. So Bitcoin scaling debate has been going on for several years, and it was always a question of, should the 1 megabyte block size limit in Bitcoin be increased? A few years ago, it was much more theoretical. People warned about what would happen when that limit was hit. They said fees would get high, confirmation times would get longer, and the opposition, largely Bitcoin Core and their supporters, said, no, that won't happen. We'll have second layer solutions, we'll have Lightning, we'll have SegWit. It's not a big deal. We don't need to do it. 1 year ago, that limit actually was hit, and exactly what the critics said would happen did happen. Fees went from a few pennies per transaction to multiple dollars per transaction. Confirmation times went from 10 minutes to sometimes a couple of hours on average. And this created a lot of problems for Bitcoin. A lot of the use cases that really attracted people to Bitcoin in the beginning, you could use it for commerce on the internet. You could use it for betting with friends, sending small amounts of money back and forth. All of those became completely impractical. And Bitcoin kind of turned into a speculative asset instead, where people would just trade it. They would say hodl to the moon, etc. And I think that loss of utility actually really damaged the prospects for Bitcoin. So a few months ago in New York, there was the New York Agreement, in which case businesses from both sides of the political split came together. And they said, okay, a compromise. We'll activate SegWit for the layer 2, and we will raise the block size to 2 megabytes. 1 month ago, 2 months ago, SegWit was activated, and that had a lot of the original big blockers worried. So on August 1st, they split off and created Bitcoin Cash, which is basically the original Bitcoin chain with 8 megabyte blocks. And no SegWit, no replace by fee, etc. Bitcoin Cash retains all these properties. It's useful for commerce. It's useful for useful for small transactions. I've personally been using it to send money back and forth with my friends. Already bought a few things online with it. So that's a very compelling use case to me. One of the big arguments against raising the block size, also from the Bitcoin Core side, is that hard forks are bad, hard forks are dangerous, and that they should be avoided. They said if you hard fork the chain, there will be confusion, people will lose money, etc. And then a hard fork happened, and none of those things happened. In fact, the prices of both different coins went up, and currently the value of the two coins together is higher than the value of Bitcoin ever was. Well, not ever, but before the fork. So that argument right now is kind of null and void. The fork has happened, the two things exist. So now the debate isn't so much, should we have big blocks or small blocks? Now we get to have these two different ideas compete in the free market.
Okay, I'm Simon Dixon from banktothefuture.com. I guess it's a bit, it's interesting to say this is a debate because at first I did think this would genuinely be a debate. But as Jake said, the hard fork proved that you can have a hard fork and there's not actually too much to be scared of. And so the way that I see it, and I think Jake might see it slightly differently, is that we have Bitcoin and an altcoin now. And the altcoin was a dividend that everyone could sell for Bitcoin, or they could decide to hedge their bets if they didn't believe that if they believed that this was a genuine threat to Bitcoin. Then if this, it could be a very foolish move if you did sell your Bitcoin Cash, because now you've destroyed a lot of your wealth because you thought that one side was definitely going to succeed. So it created a very interesting scenario. I should disclose, I did sell probably about 75% of my Bitcoin Cash for Bitcoin on the first day. That turned out to be not such a great move because I thought it was going to just be a complete dumb bet. And that turned out not to be the case. But the reason that I see Bitcoin Cash as an altcoin and Bitcoin as Bitcoin is because the same reason every single currency that ever tries to compete with Bitcoin has just this insurmountable task of firstly trying to get all the infrastructure that's been built around the last 8 years around Bitcoin. And secondly, they always have a centralization problem. So one of the biggest criticisms of Bitcoin from those that wanted to hard fork and those that wanted to is that Bitcoin's been centralized, the development is controlled, and it's a company's agenda, blockstream, that's kind of dictating the future of Bitcoin. And in Bitcoin, there are definitely certain degrees of centralization. Whether there are a number of very influential developers that are all paid by one company, and there is a large amount of mining that's run by the same people that produce hardware. So while we do have degrees of centralization in Bitcoin, we are without a doubt the most decentralized thing that exists today. And the reason is because for the last 3 years, the developers all tried to get their way and couldn't get their way. The miners all tried to get their way and couldn't get their way. The governments tried to get their way and couldn't get their way. The businesses all tried to get their way and just couldn't get their way. And the users tried to get their way and couldn't get their way. And that is because in the net, while there's pockets of centralization, Bitcoin is truly decentralized. And the reason the scaling debate happened was because nobody could control it. Now, I don't believe that's the case for any other altcoin. I believe every other altcoin, including Bitcoin Cash, will have a degree of centralization that can completely dictate the future of that if they chose. And I believe that is the case with Bitcoin Cash right now. I'm not exactly sure who that is, but I believe that there's way more opportunity. So the way that I see it is it's very healthy for the miners and the developers to be at war. That's a very healthy environment to be in because, if just like in the real economy, you kind of have, China and America competing for different schools of thoughts and different ideologies. And you have these, very dominant economies that think very differently, and the two keep each other in check because they have to work together. Otherwise, they're literally going to nuke the whole world. Then it's the same with Bitcoin. If miners and developers got on and agreed, then it would be much more centralized currency. And so to me, decentralization is the reason that Bitcoin matters. There has to be 21 million Bitcoins. There can't be 42 million. So prior to the fork, that was a concern of mine. It turned out that that was not a concern. And Bitcoin is still as decentralized as ever. And now we have people that have different ideologies can go to a different, implementation, and they can. And now the fighting's over. And now we've got two different versions. And those that want to be ultra conservative can just keep all their versions of Bitcoin, and whichever wins, it doesn't matter. Or those that want to make a stance and a belief, they can speculate more and put all their money onto one chain. But the other thing to observe is that there definitely was some. I wouldn't call it manipulation, because Bitcoin is all about everyone acting in their own self-interest, and people should expect people to act in their own self-interest. Miners act in their own self-interest. Businesses act in their own self-interest. Developers, users, everyone acts in their self-interest, and that works. And it works very well. Everyone trying to push their own self-interest. But there certainly was blocks being full and transaction fees slowing down was, in my opinion, certainly a coordinated effort to make Bitcoin look worse than it was. Because as soon as the hard fork happened, spam stopped, it returned to low transaction fees, everything sped up again. And it seems that Bitcoin is not at that full block and capacity that was really being pitched as the real downside of what's happening. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't be, because it will if we get the adoption we need. And there's a real interesting question that still remains to be answered, and the final thought is that eventually mining goes, and mining has to be replaced by transaction fees, and therefore transaction fees do have to be profitable enough to secure the entire network at some point. I'm done.
Now welcome Jack to further the case for Bitcoin Cash.
Sure. First of all, thanks everyone for coming tonight. I think who has come to another event before at our office? Okay, great. So good to see repeat people. As you know, for some background, OKCoin was the first major exchange to announce support for Bitcoin Cash. That is not because of our view on Bitcoin Cash, its attributes in particular, but throughout the years that we were engaged in the scaling debate, we always felt the inefficiencies of meeting in a room in Hong Kong or Beijing or New York. And so our view as an exchange, and we've said it publicly, was to support, to a reasonable extent, any of which all forks. Okay, and so that's the case going forward for other forks as well. So I think now that the hard fork has happened, it's shown that hard forks are, in our estimation, the right way to decide different debates. But I do want to throw a thought experiment. Suppose Bitcoin, which is not really a suppose because the original white paper says peer-to-peer electronic cash. Suppose the Bitcoin you were using the last 7 years already had scaling built in from 1 megabyte and further. Would there have been a, today, market cap of 12% support to say, let's get off of that, today's however many megabytes, and let's make a new 1 megabyte coin? Would that fork, had it been the other way around, been supported as much as Bitcoin Cash? I'm not so sure. So I think a lot of times, because of the convenience of what we want to name Bitcoin or altcoin or Bcash, I said it, that's okay, right? The default in everyone's mind is that the original chain is Bitcoin, which it is, okay? But in that naming mechanism and the industry's reaction to that has been a huge disadvantage to Bitcoin Cash. For example, companies that don't want to support Bitcoin Cash have sometimes made a decision, like you see with Zappo, to sell everyone's Bitcoin's cash at a future date and give you your credits in Bitcoin, making that decision on behalf of users. Other companies like Local Bitcoin have done the same thing. That meant built into this fork was a automated selling pressure on Bitcoin Cash. And despite that, as Simon will tell you, the price has been very, very, very resilient. So the market, I think, is the best sign of sort of which forks are more preferred. And I don't think the value necessarily is about one surpassing another. I think the attributes are there. I also want to point out that the fork has already happened. It's been 2 months. In some ways, this feels like one community happened to be with another community talking about which fork is better when the fork has already happened. And in fact, I believe the future of Bitcoin Cash depends on its future roadmap. So it's not about, maybe you make a great point, we should go back to 5 megabytes. It's not about that debate. It's about, okay, now there's 8. What happens in this view when there's more transactions? How do you scale beyond that? Are you open to Lightning networks? And I think the community on the cash side is yes. The other hypothetical is, I believe, several years ago, there are people who really believe that we would never, ever have a hard fork. So that threat, I don't know if this makes sense. It's like kind of, you never thought your girlfriend would ever leave you kind of thing. Once it's happened, you're a little bit more cautious. So I think for both development communities, people are going to be working much more to satisfy the user base. So the Bitcoin Cash developers and miners, etc., are going to be much more responsible to what the users want to prevent a hard fork coming in the future on Bitcoin Cash. Because while it's great to give users choice for any particular group, they of course want to keep their communities close. And lastly, I want to point out the new user experience. Many of us have invested a lot of our time into Bitcoin. We've studied the history behind the politics, the controversies, met the actors involved, did a lot of research, right? But put yourself in the position of the future hundreds of millions and billions of people that you want to onboard any currency, whether that's Ethereum or Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin. Those people neither have that interest nor should be forced to study on that history and make their own judgment. So from their vantage point, they're going to look at just kind of market psychology. They're going to look at a cheaper coin. They're going to look at cheaper transactions. And even if they have heard something about, well, it's something like some people tell me it's more centralized or it's got issues. I think history will show you that when the US dollar detached from gold, people know it's not backed by anything. And it's running into issues maybe recently. But for many, many decades after, people carried on using it. So if you know your next transaction is not going to be the fatal transaction that will be affected by the supposed centralization, and that transaction is very cheap, you're going to have this inertia to propel you to take that cheap transaction over the more expensive transaction, even if you understand or if you think there's a greater risk with Bitcoin Cash, which I don't think I subscribe to. And then people make the argument, okay, fine, if you want cheaper transactions, why don't you go use Litecoin or some other coin that has cheaper transactions? And that's where I think Bitcoin Cash shows it captured the network effect that was built by Bitcoin, which garnered a lot of users, and there's the same switching costs of those users from wanting to switch to another coin en masse. This is the best combination of the network effects plus certain features that I think are very valuable to the user base.
Thank you very much, Jack. And now the last speaker for the Bitcoin side and the last speaker as a whole, Felix.
Hi, my name is Felix. I'm a Bitcoin user since 2012. I'm a programmer. I get paid in Bitcoin mostly. I use Bitcoin as my global bank account and don't use any banking system anymore. Pretty much, I don't have a credit card. So I'm relying on Bitcoin pretty much on my day-to-day life. So I care for its well-being and for it to continue as to exist, which is not necessarily certain, because I think a lot of people confuse often the honey badger of money. In certain ways, it's, I think, a lot more fragile than we want to admit, and in other cases, it's also a lot more robust than we want to admit. But I think these are all topics. It's an experiment we are gonna explore and find answers to that, to these specific questions. I was a little worried about the Bitcoin Cash fork before it happened. Mostly because of all the confusion I saw when we had the Ethereum and Ethereum Classic fork, because I saw a lot of people suddenly ask me like, okay, I want to get into Ethereum, which one should I buy? Like there are two now, like, which one is the real one? Like for me, I think these are mostly like ideological questions, so I couldn't give them an answer. I told them like read up on the history of them and then decide which one you want to choose. But I think we had a confusion now happening. So I think that is one of the worst part about Bitcoin Cash. And to that, the address format is the same. So I can imagine a lot of exchanges have also problems where users send money to one address and they want to send to the other address. So it creates a lot of support costs, like support hours that go with that. Like some funds might even be lost forever. Other parts of the hard fork were good. So I agree with safe hard forks. If we cannot agree on as a community on which way to go forward, I think hard forks might be fine if they're safe. And I have made a list of 5 things which I consider to be a safe hard fork, which is the first is user facing. You change the address format. You change the you implement the replay protection, and you implement wipeout protection. You should change the port on the node, peer-to-peer node, that is not user-facing, but it's generally good process. You don't use port 80 for HTTP and use port 443 for HTTPS. So that's just like generally good network behavior on the internet to use your port for your protocol. And so also the magic number which precedes every peer-to-peer message.
6 change the name.
Pardon?
Change the name. Yeah.
You can argue, I think, yeah, change the name, like that is, put something at the end. Like I think we will see more hard forks next year. That's my prediction for 2018. Like there will be a lot more hard forks because it creates interesting incentives for exchanges to list them because more volume, so more volume generated, more fees collected. But if it's a real benefit to the end user, I'm a little bit more skeptical about that. Sorry. So that's so some of these things were addressed by Bitcoin Cash, which I admire. For what I think was more dangerous is like the EDA, the emergency difficulty adjustment, which creates like weird incentives for miners to like not actually be mining, because then they can lower the difficulty very easily to then mine again much more. So it will like mix weirdly with the inflation schedule of these I think 4 million Bitcoins or Bitcoin Cash to be mined. I think Bitcoin Cash will mine out much quicker. And if we all know that, like at least for proof of work blockchains, the security is proportional to the amount of money or value created by the miners. So eventually, as Simon pointed out, you have to replace the subsidy by the transaction fees, right? And a lot of people argue, oh, that is like in 100 years when last Bitcoin will be mined. Well, it's actually much closer because 99% of all Bitcoins will be mined according to schedule after 27 years. And we're already in year 8, so that's almost 1/3. So we got like 18 more years. So somebody who's born today, when they turn 18, almost no more Bitcoin will be mined. So the fees have to replace the subsidy, unless we want another system where like the central banks continue to print money. If we care about the 21 million coin limit, I think then we need to replace the subsidy with fees. That will happen faster in Bitcoin Cash because of the EDA. And at the same time, I see less and less transaction volume. You said, yes, on the exchange volume, they are much higher. But last time I checked, I think today on the blockchain per day, there are, I think, 3 times as much transactions on the Dogecoin network and on the Bitcoin Cash network. Just that in comparison. I mean, the exchange volume is much higher, but that's speculation. And the other thing is like using a blockchain to transfer value from one public key to another public key. And then I wanted to address the division part about like Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. I think Bitcoin Cash likes to point out like it's a cash system, right? I would also like to point out, yes, the title also says peer-to-peer network, right? Which in the terms of like network topology requires that you run a peer-to-peer node. Running a peer-to-peer node is expensive, especially with more and more growing blockchain space. You have to buy new hardware, you have to buy a more expensive internet connection if you want to have all coffees in the world recorded forever. Like forever is a fucking long ass time. Humans are very bad at estimating long time frames. Forever is a very long ass time. Even if we are not anymore around, people in the future will still want to use Bitcoin and not have to like verify the last 200 years of coffee Starbucks transactions. Yeah, and I think for raising the block size or in general like more transaction space, I think I'm not generally against hard forks. I think eventually they might be necessarily. I'm not entirely decided there yet. But I think we should, in that case, mostly listen to the engineering team that has brought Bitcoin from that moment Satoshi left in 2010 to what it is today, because most of the code that is written today, like the software Satoshi left us with in 2010, wouldn't be capable to handle this traffic that we have today. That is completely delusional. I just want to read one quote in his last forum message in December 2010. There's more work to do on DOS, but I'm doing a quick build of what I've so far in case it's needed before venturing into more complex ideas. The build for this version is 0.319. We are at 0.15 now, released I think 2 weeks ago, and that's been an outstanding engineering work by the current core developers. So I think that requires a lot more attention. So one last thing. So we should say that I think we should listen to the engineering team that have been building that for so long, and not like be like the Titanic, who just want to reach Europe or New York, I don't know which one it was, as fast as possible to make like big noises, but and then hit an iceberg and sink. Because if we want Bitcoin to be a store of value, I think about store of value. Can I put my savings or some of my savings there, and they will still be around in 20 years? And I think for a lot of these altcoins you have today, they might not be. That's a store of value. Thank you.
Now I'm gonna join you guys and open up a few more open questions. Now feel free to interrupt each other and say Bcash. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, well, great debate. Thank you all. Who said you're not professional debaters? It's quite good speeches. I think so. I'm gonna open up with a question, and that's whether you believe in network effects. Of course, not in believe whether they exist or not, but whether those are incredibly important to the success of cryptocurrencies. And of course, the implied question is there of whether there can only be one winner, and how you expect this like race to play out. How do you expect like Bitcoin Cash to overtake Bitcoin, or to Bitcoin to like render Bitcoin Cash useless, or do you just dismiss the notion and say there might be room for both? Maybe one of you to start.
I think network effect is very important, and it's something that's very hard to overcome for an up-and-coming new cryptocurrency. So for years in Bitcoin, even as the scaling debate went on, and I disagreed with the whole small block second layer vision, I still didn't leave Bitcoin. People would say, well, if you don't like it, just sell all your Bitcoins, go to Litecoin. But as Jack mentioned, it's not so simple to do that. You don't have the same merchants. You don't have as large of a community using it. And it's a pretty hard barrier to overcome. So one of the ways that Bitcoin Cash solved that is its distribution mechanism, which is just using the same ledger. That way, every person who was a holder of Bitcoin before, or Bitcoin private keys, now has Bitcoin Cash. So I've since sold a lot of my BTC and put that in Bitcoin Cash. And to an extent, it does feel a lot like losing a lot of the network effect and starting over. But it feels like a lot of that initial hurdle has already been overcome
the distribution.
Yeah, the network effect is hugely important. That was actually one of the most clever parts of Bitcoin Cash, was that it used a new distribution model whereby even if a business or an exchange didn't want to support it, the prospect of being sued by all their customers for not giving them free money was too overwhelming for every exchange and every wallet in the world. So you had all the customers, even if they supported Bitcoin, having 10, 20, 30% free money was something you were going to lobby your exchanges and wallets and everyone for. So it was, without a doubt, the most clever marketing and launch strategy we've ever seen for an altcoin. And that was why it's where it is today, in my opinion.
That's also why we're going to see more in the future.
Yeah, and that's why we're going to see the next ones and 2x and stuff. I don't think you get too many of these. I think the community gets quite wise and they'll become real. I guess it's the credibility. It's the credibility.
But it will take some time. I mean, I didn't thought we had like 1,000 cryptocurrencies, 100 cryptocurrencies that will be worth over $100 million. Like,
yeah,
I was wrong before.
Every time I think I know something in Bitcoin, it shows me something completely the opposite of what I thought. And so that's the excitement of the market, really. But I do want to say that Bitcoin, to me, is a one-time freak event that will never happen again, in my opinion. I think the set of circumstances that has led Bitcoin to be where it is today over the last 8 years are just a freaky, insane, and every single event was needed. Silk Road was needed, Mt. Gox was needed, everything was needed to bring Bitcoin to where it is today. The challenge that people have today is that the only way to really launch a coin is to attach someone's credibility to the coin. And that's the very thing that I think will make it fail in the end. Well, not fail, there's no real fade in cryptocurrencies, but not get beyond Bitcoin, we'll say. And Ethereum's a classic example of the only way you can get the credibility of Ethereum is to attach a very credible character to the launch, and Vitalik becomes then the bottleneck for the growth of it. And then every time something happens, everyone looks to Vitalik, and Satoshi had this genius, insane, crazy idea of making sure that he was never found. And that is one of the main reasons why Bitcoin is where it is today, I believe. But every coin today has to attach credibility to it, because if someone anonymous comes along and launches a coin, we will say scam, rubbish, get rid of it. So there's a real problem, and that is that launching new coins is very hard without attaching a credible character, and then the credible character becomes the bottleneck to its success.
Felix, I have a question for you. So do you believe that in theory it's possible for a minority chain or for a altcoin to surpass Bitcoin? And if not, like, why is that not possible? What prevents it? And if yes, then like under what circumstances would it be possible for, like, for example, in an extreme case, let's assume the Bitcoin mining algorithm leads to inherent centralization, or the Bitcoin development is like a big conspiracy, or all the world's wallet providers get together to introduce KYC AML into the system. Like, what do you believe?
That's a good question. I think there's definitely room for competition in the space, and it's also good because it keeps just like in a normal business world, like we have the idea of competition. So because it forces competitors to constantly innovate, and that's true for companies and for cryptocurrencies, I think, as well. The question is then, though, like how many people do we have on this planet who actually, because it's really rocket science, who are able to develop solid software that is safe and secure? Because, like, a term that is pretty much known in IT security is security by obscurity, and that basically means like your software might have like a lot of bugs, but since it's like behind a big firewall, like nobody will find these bugs. Bitcoin is out in the open. It's open source. Like if there's a smart hacker in the world who can hack the Bitcoin blockchain or the private keys, he can basically steal all the money he wants. So you basically have this constant test of this. I think for that we need a strong engineering team, and finding a lot of them surrounding a lot of projects, I think that will be hard. So to your question of like how can a minority fork overcome Bitcoin, maybe if they have a more sound engineering team and can motivate more people to work on that. I think that's what I see with a lot of these altcoins is they start, and then in the beginning a lot of people are excited about it, and then it fades away. Like, and then like I look at the GitHubs and there's like zero development, like no commits, but like the forking commit.
Let's pass that point on right away. What do you believe went wrong in like Bitcoin's protocol development, right? That made it impossible to implement changes right there, made it impossible to upgrade block size, for example, without a split of the network. And how do you believe this will be solved, or how do you believe it will be prevented that a single company takes over all the Bitcoin developers, as some may say we have in the status quo?
Yeah, sure. You can go heavier. I'll go a little lighter. I think it's more that the fork happened less because of any conspiracies or one company. I know there's a lot of frustrations there with.
Well, it goes both ways, right? Like there are conspiracies that Bitcoin might be centralized in its protocol development, and Bitcoin Cash might be decentralized.
Sure. But putting the focus on Bitcoin, I think it was more of a timing issue. It was, had Lightning been ready years ago, or had Segwit been ready years ago, I think before the congestion came about a year ago, maybe there would not be this urge. I think that what the community didn't really understand was, okay, when are these scaling solutions really going to come? And we're stuck at 1 megabyte. Do we have a solution in the medium term as we transition to layer 2? So I think there was more of a timing issue. I guess if you're in control of the code, you feel very confident about what you have to come, so you don't really see the user issues today. But I think there was that bit of a pent-up sort of demand to kind of want to see something. Yeah.
Do you want to go stronger?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a certain subset of the Bitcoin core developers who have been very, very stubborn about raising the block size. And it wasn't always all the core developers, but currently it is all of them, because they managed to oust or like drive out of frustration any of the other developers who disagreed with them. So you saw Gavin Andrewson leave the project, Jeff Garzik, Mike Hearn. And I think the real source for the split and the frustration is that the core developers that are remaining failed to listen to the needs of users and businesses who were relying on Bitcoin, this kind of fast transaction, low fee model for their business models. You have remittances, you have payments companies, you have merchants who have like built their business around accepting Bitcoin payments. And a lot of those use cases were kind of driven out. So it's really a false argument that this is the miners versus the developers. There's actually a lot of community demand for the vision of peer-to-peer electronic cash. And another thing I would actually like to address is you guys often talk about like Bitcoin as a settlement network or store of value. I don't think that's mutually exclusive with being peer-to-peer eCash. Like prior to Bitcoin's blocks becoming full, it was useful both as cash and as a store of value. So in this case, Bitcoin Cash, maybe its future is more uncertain, maybe it's more volatile right now, but you can use it both for payments and storing value. But the Bitcoin core chain, you can actually only use for storing value.
I want to, I'm not sure which developer said that, but I think well, for me, one of them, because I used to be a big blocker. I was a big fan of my current XT fork idea, and I promoted that in 2014, I think, for a pretty long time. Before I started like getting more into like development and saw like what the ceiling is actually much lower for what we can do today. Anyway, and then some developers said we could raise the blocks right now, but it would simply kick down the can down the road, and then humans like usually tend to be lazy. like unless like a problem really is like in the front door. And like Lightning has really the potential to scale to much more transactions, and it's even more private because they're not all recorded in the blockchain, and you can pretty much have channels which can exchange like thousands of times per day, and you only need to settle later on the blockchain, and you know already how the blockchain will react because it's like this ultimate judge where we both know already how the result will be because we have like this payment channel as like contracts ahead of time.
Yes, I think I believe peer-to-peer payment network is absolutely essential and going to become more and more important. I think censorship-resistant money you can own, money you can spend without anyone telling you how to spend it, and based upon a sound monetary policy is what I signed up for. And if that was gone, if Bitcoin was 42 million, I'd be out because that we just killed the whole thing. It's over. Forget blockchain, forget everything.
42 million per Bitcoin.
If there were 42 million Bitcoins.
Does the audience also have some questions? Maybe either questions about Bitcoin Cash or questions to the audience, to the panel in general, or maybe just you want to poke some holes in the arguments. I believe you have the first.
Yeah, just a question in general. So say theoretically the Chinese government bans all crypto mining. What would be the impact on your respective blockchains?
Yeah. I used to work at Bitmain. I'm pretty familiar with the mining industry. I think it would be a temporary inconvenience for the network. It would cause block times to slow down. It would probably definitely cause a lot of like panic in the market, but eventually the difficulty would readjust downwards and it would adjust to the mining that's outside of China. I don't think it would have any sort of long-term impact on the stability of the network.
Yeah, so I believe at the moment we're in what I call the accumulation phase. This is all of the investment banks, fund managers, and institutions in the world have realized Bitcoin was something that they should have put into. And so everyone's in a race for the cheap Bitcoin because there's only a few of these left, and there's only going to be so many. So I believe the long-term trend is we're currently in accumulation. And so governments and banks and everything will be accumulating into any bad news, into any dip. So a temporary, a ban on mining in China will have a very negative effect on price. It will probably crash at $1,000. But by volume, the economics of Bitcoin do not change. The mining industry is a very resilient industry. The minings will relocate somewhere else. We'll have an exodus over to, and we'll end up with a more decentralized mining network all around the world, and long-term, completely bullish. One of the best things that ever happened, maybe.
Quite similar to Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash in this regard.
Yes.
I think that's the best part about Bitcoin because every bad news is good news. Like this meme of this is actually good news. I mean, when one jurisdiction kind of like bans this mining, then automatically Bitcoin will decentralize more around the planet, and we have more mining facilities, not like centralized in one country.
You said 2 years ago that JP Morgan can attack Bitcoin and the Chinese government can attack Bitcoin, and we still have a $4,000 Bitcoin and then $4,500 if you include both. I would have said you're crazy, but we're there. That's where we are today. Incredible achievement.
I have a question, please. Say in a few years' time, the 1 megablock limit is actually there's a ceiling, and you decided maybe it's a good idea to increase it to 8 megablock. And then on your side, maybe in a few years' time, you think Lightning is a good idea, so we incorporate all the SegWit and the Lightning. So what would happen? You have basically two things of the same nature running in the market.
I don't think there's any fundamental opposition on the big blocker side against second-layer networks. It's more an opposition to like constraining demand or constraining the capacity of the main network to drive users to a second layer.
So it's actually possible that in a few years' time, when we have mass adoption, the two chains actually would adopt the same features.
Or whenever it's ready. Like I think part of the reason for the split is that because the needs of the businesses and the users weren't met, there was like a sense of urgency. If Bitcoin Core had just raised the block size a few megabytes and bought enough time to develop these things, I don't think anyone would have had any sort of
Right. I think that's theoretically possible that the two can switch lanes with each other. If you were a user that wanted that, that's why it's the big difference between Bitcoin Cash as a fork coin or child coin versus an altcoin. If you believe that, you had a chance, you probably still do, to hold both coins from the split. And so that you're immune to further splits or whether they change divisions or things like that. So you can hold both. Now, I think once the effects post-fork and pre-fork are very different. So pre-fork, there's a sort of a market interest to have some kind of fork prevention or kind of, let's see if we can have a meeting of the minds that's be more towards the middle. Kind of what you see at the presidential elections, where in the ultimate election, between the Democrats and the Republicans, you try to get the independent voters in the middle. Post-fork is actually kind of like the primaries, right? Where you want to be as extreme to your base as you want. So we're in this post-fork phase, so I don't necessarily see the cash divide, the small guys, the small block guys trying to go bigger block. I don't necessarily see cash wanting to intentionally go after the guys who want small blocks. I think they're going to go after their own ecosystem, and I think that's great.
Yeah, I saw that too. Like, I think the infighting has at least stopped a little bit for now, and each team can now more focus on drilling for their own coin if you want, instead of constantly infighting and stealing resources from actually continuing to develop.
We have 2 more questions. Yeah.
Do you see or can Bitcoin learn from other altcoins development style? Let's say, right, if they have better governance systems, instead of all this, bickering with each other, that's they will think, or perhaps it's better to copy from the newer types of governance systems instead of having no one to decide on anything.
I think we definitely need an acute dog or something on top of our coin, or any other animal.
I think that there are things to be learned. For example, I think Monero and Zcash both have regularly scheduled hard forks, like once every 6 months or once every year. And it's not a huge point of debate in their community. They just call it an upgrade. It's like, well, if you don't upgrade to this newest version of software, you're not going to be on the same network as us. And sure enough, everyone upgrades. It doesn't cause like years-long civil wars over this feature.
I think it's important to have different coins that come along and try and do different things in a different way, and not to break the only coin that is a store of value. Not to break that. That's one of my main things, because everything else can do whatever. It can be speculative assets, but I just believe there's only one store of value, and we will only have one store of value. In terms of governance, I think it's easy to think that the bickering and arguing is unhealthy, but it's really healthy. It's the reason Bitcoin is the reason it's the only store of value is because no one can get their way, and that's a feature, not a bug.
We'll take one more question, and we have a little bit of time to mingle then. Questions? Jeffrey.
Okay. So right now, just a question towards the BCC side. Right now in the BCC, there's this issue of the EDA, which causes miners to jump on, jump off at opportune moments, right? Is there any roadmap to fix this right now?
I haven't been following the development super closely.
Okay.
I would support that at some point when its survival becomes like more assured.
Okay.
But right now, when it's kind of competing against BTC, I think it's a useful feature to have.
All right.
Quick question. Yeah, Dominique?
Can someone discuss the upcoming fork and what impact it would have for both sides?
Cool.
Actually, that's an interesting question.
That's
a good question.
If it matters.
If I'm a Bcash shill, do I want 2x to happen? Do I want it not to happen? Do I want it to happen like with reprotection, without reprotection? What is like, from your perspective, the best outcome for your coin, obviously, and the worst outcome for Bitcoin? Or because if you have a coin that doesn't increase block size, yours is obviously like has a bigger USP and like we have bigger blocks, right? So the same. Like I'm just wondering, like, what is your personal opinion?
I think from the perspective of what's good for Bitcoin Cash, the worst outcome would actually be that SegWit2x just happens smoothly and everyone goes along with it. And it's Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin with 2 megabyte blocks in SegWit. But it doesn't look like that's going to happen. It looks like there's going to be another community split between people who only want 1 megabyte, and then all the exchanges and the miners who want 2 megabytes. I actually think that's a good outcome for Bitcoin Cash. Because while they're busy fighting each other, Bitcoin Cash will have had more time to establish itself, have a more cohesive community, and not be tearing itself apart.
Yeah, we got a new game theory coming around the corner. We got it all over again. We got the media reporting how Bitcoin's going 3 ways, and how Bitcoin's dead, and again, this all coming again. I think there'll be a lot less fear. I think once you see it once and Bitcoin still survives, and then you see it twice and Bitcoin still survives, I think the third and the fourth would just not be as effective at all in terms of creating uncertainty.
Bitcoin has died already 166 times. And
Yeah.
people keep on writing it's dying.
Yeah, but it appears that the market wants to see a chain with SegWit and small blocks, the chain with big blocks, and a chain with bigger blocks and SegWit, and then the 3, the market can just see if they can learn anything from each other, and maybe they will converge onto the same thing, and you just have competing development teams. Who knows? 63 million Bitcoin.
One of the problems though is like if you're an investor is like pre-hard fork, you don't have to take a decision if you either don't care or you're not technical enough to evaluate these different claims. I think as a hodler it was very easy pre-fork because also now like if you never sold or never moved any coins, you have now both, and whatever coin wins. The problem is now if you sold on one chain and there's not a hard fork, you will not get that one, right? Because so it's getting more and more confusing, I guess, for
speculation.
Yeah. The exchanges will love it.
I think there'll be products down the line where you can replicate a full Bitcoin. So you buy that product, and then the exchange will fill across
automatically across all chains.
If you look at 2-year returns of Bitcoin, you should fundamentally be showing all forks combined versus 2 years of Bitcoin. That's kind of how the media should be reporting it. But again, because of this like human kind of naming convention, you like to just call one of the particular chains Bitcoin. And then as far as the 2x, I think there's actually a relationship between how successful Bitcoin Cash turned out to be and how it does in this coming next month versus how successful 2x, whether it will even fork or whether it will be successful. So I think the 2x agreement, which came in New York in May, was done prior to any idea that the Bitcoin Cash fork was going to happen. So there was a lot of support back then, and those support are backed by sort of people's words, egos, signatures, etc. And so there's sort of this continuation of that commitment. But the reason why Jake probably thinks is less likely to happen is if you look at is there actual natural support behind a combination of both having SegWit and having some aspect of slightly larger blocks. That doesn't seem like, that looks like kind of the independent party candidate. It goes back to that politics analogy. So I think maybe Cash was the surprise darling that came in this cycle. I think that they're still up in the air.
That's the good part about Bitcoin, is always surprises. Like, I stopped watching Game of Thrones, it's so boring.
The next season of Bitcoin, what will it bring? But please give a round of applause to all our panelists.
For the community.
Please, to the community.
If you were asked by anyone from the community or the public who's not been following Bitcoin, I want to buy Bitcoin just in 1 minute, but there's 2. Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, which one and why, but with less than 1 minute. Is that, oh, this is cheap Bitcoin Cash because it's cheaper, oh, buy Bitcoin because this is the real one?
People hate my advice because it sounds like the most expensive possibility, but I say buy both. That's my starting line. If they want to learn more, they might get into it, but starting line, I still say buy both chains equally.
Okay.
Now, if a newbie comes to me, firstly, the majority of people that own Bitcoin do not give a damn or understand anything that we just said, and they just believe there's one Bitcoin, and they will just be buying the Bitcoin that they can buy that's supported with everything they've done. And that's why, to me, Bitcoin is still Bitcoin.
Thank you.
A quick
Yeah,
question,
thank you.
please,
Yeah.
for the
Let's ask. We find out some time. Let's wrap this up also for the we have some time to mingle a little bit. Gotta keep a bit in a bracket. Thank you very much. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Good job, man. Good job.
Thank you so much.